Ladies and gentlemen, dear media friends, good afternoon. It's a real pleasure for me to be here and a warm welcome to you all for attending this press conference. Thank you for your long-term support and concern of poverty alleviation task. This year is a turning point for the 13th five-year plan and the task of building a well-off society in an around way. It's also the ending year of the poverty alleviation task. In the end of last year, during the National Economic Conference, the national government has made some detailed arrangements for poverty reduction. But then, the outbreak of COVID-19 sent some repercussions to the whole nation. And this is the same thing for poverty reduction. For the migrant workers who work outside, they have been impacted, and the poor households' development and production have been undermined. The projects of poverty reduction and the enterprises, factories in the field of poverty reduction have all been delayed in the timetable. On March the 6th, General Secretary Xi Jinping convened a conference themed under poverty alleviation. He re-emphasized that by 2020, all of the poor people must be gotten rid of poverty. That's the solemn mission and promise made by the CPC Central Committee. There is no buffer zone for it. And with the coordination and leadership of the CPC Central Committee, this year, the task of poverty reduction will be the focal point. All localities and different departments across the nation will abide by the instructions by General Secretary Xi Jinping and rise up to the challenges to accomplish the mission of poverty alleviation. With the efforts of all sides, we have controlled the effects of COVID-19, and our poverty reduction task has made some big headways. Every week, we will do our investigation. Now, with the turning of the COVID-19, we have changed that frequency to once per month. The data by the end of May is not out yet, but by the end of April, our support targets of about 900,000 people have been moved to the newly established counties. And we have steadily gone ahead with this task. The poverty reduction has been realized because now only 95% of last year's poverty-stricken people are existing. Over 3 million people have been helped, particularly the workers, like the migrant workers and those working in the factories. The projects of poverty reduction have about 82% of them being implemented. The sales revenue has also been over 30 billion. We have met the task and requirements in the West and the East. In general, the influence of COVID-19 has been controlled to the utmost. It will not change the direction of poverty reduction task, including the targets. We will remain unchanged. We will bottom out, and the standards and criteria of poverty reduction will remain unchanged as well. The battle of poverty reduction will not be delayed in the timetable. In the next step, we will continue certain efforts. Firstly, we will enhance the battle of helping the poverty-stricken counties, particularly the 1,113 poverty-stricken counties. We will urge them to implement the policies and measures, particularly the 2 steps and 3 guarantee measures, so that the relocation will be handled properly. We will organize social organizations and private enterprises to help those poor counties to guarantee that the remaining task will be fulfilled. Second, employment to support poverty reduction. This year, for the poor laborers working outside their hometown, the number will be exceeding 28 million. In the East China, it's more hopeful, and in Central and West China, the laborers who used to be poor people according to the standard must be over a certain number, no less than that number in last year. At the same time, we would stabilize the achievements for those laborers who have already worked elsewhere. For those who are willing to migrate for better work opportunity, we will help them to realize it. We also support the dragon-head enterprises and the poverty-stricken factories to resume their production. We also will help the laborers to find a job in the local area. Third, consumption-oriented poverty reduction. To conquer COVID-19 and strengthen the development of industries, that will be a major area to work on. For example, the basket policy must be combined. In East China, we must enhance the sales of the products belonging to the circle of poverty reduction. We must standardize the consumption market and prepare the contracts to solve any sales problem. Fourth, for those households enduring instability of their efforts and those impacted by COVID-19, as long as they have income reduction, we will take targeted measures to help them increase their revenue and income. For those poor people living in the remote areas, we will give them some subsidies. For example, the job opportunities. For those who are incapable of laboring, we will offer comprehensive guarantee. We are convinced that General Secretary Xi Jinping and the CPC Central Committee will lead the whole nation with joint efforts to lead somewhere. Particularly, we have a good foundation of the previous years. We have confidence, capability, and conditions to win this battle. Now I'm pleased to take your questions. Thank you, Director Liu. Now the floor is open. Please identify yourself before you raise the question. In the third row, that gentleman, please. Thank you. I am a reporter from CCTV. As we know, for the remaining 52 poverty-stricken counties, the central government and the information office of the State Council have special arrangements. So I would love to know the updates about this campaign and the results. Thank you. Thank you for your question. As you know, our country used to have 832 poverty-stricken counties according to the criteria, and by April the 15th, 780 of those poverty-stricken counties have gotten rid of poverty. 15 provinces reported no poverty-stricken counties, which means there are 52 poverty-stricken counties in remains. At the same time, we have 128,000 poverty-stricken villages, and about 2,700 of the villages have remained in poverty. The incidence ratio of poverty over 10% still occurs in certain villages. Now, in total, 1,113 such poverty-stricken villages exist. So, focusing on those targets, the central government have made special arrangements. Up to now, in 7 provinces, they have made the detailed implementation plans for this campaign. All of those counties and villages made their own strategies, including what are the problems, how to handle them, who will be the responsible people. They have formulated very detailed schemes. In addition, for those counties still holding up the banner of poverty alleviation, the central government paid special attention by lending central budget, valuing at 30.8 billion RMB yuan. For the remaining 1,000 villages, different provinces have made some preferential policies towards them. The other localities are supportive of those remaining poverty-stricken villages because, after all, the number of those villages is decreasing. For those already gotten rid of poverty, the villages will come to the remaining villages for better help. According to our knowledge, still 1,000 of those villages are fighting this battle. Many enterprises call upon each other to help those remaining villages, and the private enterprises and social organizations echo the call very actively. Over 800 private enterprises and 228 social organizations registered for this campaign. Now, those parties are meeting each other to come up with a solution. So those are the different forces joining this battle. I think this campaign is leading somewhere. For example, the number of migrant workers. The ratio was 95% nationwide. And for those targeted villages, the ratio is 102%, 7 percentage points higher than the national average. And under the influence of COVID-19, 150,000 people have been working out. In Xinjiang, there are about 300 villages involved in this campaign. All of those cages in those villages never returned to their hometown for the Spring Festival. They remain in their posts in order to meet the target this year. So we are moving on. Next question. Thank you. I'm from the Reuters. Under the influence of COVID-19, the economic development is going downward. Will those poverty-stricken people return back to poverty? What's your take on it? Thank you. As I said, because of the impact of COVID-19, the migrant workers from the poverty-stricken areas have met some setbacks. In the previous years, after the 15th day of the Spring Festival, which means the first half of February in this year, usually those migrant workers will go out for work. But this year, it's been postponed. By the end of February, only 40% of those migrant workers started their journey towards the cities. But after 2 months' efforts, that ratio has been increased to 95% compared with the previous years. But of course, the income of those migrant workers has been affected, and we cannot make up for it. Additionally, production has been thwarted While we are preparing for the production, some production materials are lacking. But we have thought about some measures to handle it. Now, for the households living in poverty, their production has basically been immune from this COVID-19. But we still have to stay alert to avoid any setback to the sales of the produced products. Of course, we have been influenced in a great deal, but will it lead to the returning to poverty, considering the achievements we already made? We have some figures about the situation. For now, we only discover a few people returning back to poverty because of COVID-19, not because of COVID-19. Instead, they return to poverty because of certain diseases or disasters. And there are two scenarios. One, for those households easily prone to return to poverty, the number of that group increased by 380,000, added by the existing people last year. We will register the households all to give special support. Even without coronavirus, those group of people will still be prone to return to poverty, particularly some remote areas. Now, with the outbreak of COVID-19, those vulnerable groups will increase in number, even with the 2 steps and 3 guarantee measures. For example, last year, the number of that campaign target was 150,000. Now, there are about 90,000 people still left untouched by the campaign. For those group of people with vulnerabilities to any external influence, the number is about 300,000. And we have a set of measures and procedures to help those vulnerable people. For example, with the reduction of the migrant workers in number, we will develop some new posts for those people. For example, locally, we can develop certain industries to make up for the influence. Because of those policies and measures, we can conquer the difficulties. Thank you. In the 3rd row. Thank you from the Farmers Daily. To control the influence of COVID-19 in the poor areas, State Council and certain departments made special policies about the consumption-based poverty alleviation. So what are the details and what are the results? We have developed some poverty relief industries. For example, the dates production, apple plantation, and every season there will be harvesting of certain products. We must sell them. Because of COVID-19, the sales have been affected. Ever since the outbreak of COVID-19, the State Council, the Ministry of Agricultural Affairs, the Ministry of Commerce, and the supply and marketing cooperatives and the e-commerce players are working together. For one thing, in Western China, we will identify the products belonging to the selling targets of poverty alleviation, usually for the products produced by the poor people and by the poverty-stricken areas or cooperatives, or by the dragonhead enterprises belong to that group. In a word, as long as we can trigger poverty alleviation, those production and products will be named the poverty alleviation products. For now, we have identified 40,000 of those products, and they value over 390 billion RMB yuan. We have already sold 32.3 billion. As you know, Hubei province is the heavily affected province of COVID-19. Ever since the turning point comes up in March, we started our efforts with Hubei province. 7 eastern provinces help Hubei province's migrant workers to work outside, and they produce certain products. For example, the lobsters, tea, mushrooms. Those are named the poverty alleviation products. And according to the data from Hubei province, they sold over 2 billion of those products. The central government agencies called upon the other government agencies to buy those products from Hubei province. In total, 99 entities joined this force. They bought over 100 million starting from mid-March till now. So in less than 2 months' time, they bought 180 million from Hubei province. On average, it's about 1.87 million per entity. So that's the first measure. Secondly, we take diverse policies to help sell those products. For example, government procurement, the transaction market, and the e-commerce platform. Another one is through the social organizations. It's nonprofit. So through those channels, we aim to help these poor people to sell their products. What we are doing is to connect with the urban areas campaign of the basket of vegetables. After all, some products are not easily accessible by the urban areas, but the farmers produce them and they are seeking the sales channel. For example, the residents in eastern China are the consumers. For those people, buying such targeted products is not a heavy burden. So we will generate 2 benefits, but we have to be alert about the quality and the price. Particularly, we have to crack down upon those profit-seeking people producing poor quality products. And now we are already getting off to a good start. Now the next question. Thank you. The Hong Kong Business Review. This year, employment ratio is relatively high, but the newly added job posts are decreasing in number. So, particularly those migrant workers in the rural areas, how to extend the channels of employment for those farmers. And the second question is about the dedicated budget from the central government for that purpose. Speaking of the fiscal budget, the dedicated fund for poverty alleviation this year increased by 15.8%. The central government requires localities' dedicated budget for poverty alleviation to remain increased or unchanged. The central government may consider further increasing that support. For now, we have dedicated fund for poverty reduction. We also have other sources of revenues like the financial source and the social support. Adding them together, we are basically capable of fighting the battle of poverty alleviation. After all, what we have in fund is never enough, but basically we can meet the target. For the posts, because of the coronavirus, particularly the global scenario, we're facing downward pressure. Many enterprises are facing reduced production and rising unemployment ratio. That's a fact globally. China is no exception. We will continue with our employment policies while we highlight the poor people working elsewhere. I talked about our principles of helping those migrant workers. There are two principles. And for the enterprises resuming their production, we must consider some privileged policies. For example, nationwide, there are about 6 million of migrant workers nationwide. But the number of poor people working as migrant workers, that number is about 1.5 million, accounting for 25.2%. Those figures mean we lean towards the poor people when we are helping the migrant workers. After all, now the poor people account for 12% of the number of farmers in rural areas in 2012. So in comparison, that 25.2% is a relatively high number, showing our focus on that targeted group. In certain provinces like Xinjiang, Northern Xinjiang and Eastern Xinjiang are in lack of laborers, so Southern Xinjiang gathered about 50,000 migrant workers for that purpose. Some enterprises resumed their production, like the factories for poverty alleviation and the Dragon Head enterprises. In that course, we will create some special posts in those entities to help the poor people. For example, the rangers. We have about 100. We will have some non-profit posts. At village level, that number is about 850,000. We aim to raise that number to 1 million by the end of the first half of 2020. We also have some people working to protect the village roads. That number is about 250,000 nationwide. So we are working on 3 fronts at the same time. One is to help those migrant workers from the poor areas. Second, local employment. Third, the non-profit job posts for the poor people. There are 290 million migrant workers in total in China. 26 million have worked as migrant workers from the poverty-stricken areas. Another 10 million are willing to come out to seek a job in the urban areas, and we are trying to help them out. And we are confident about that. For the 290 million migrant workers, only 20 million of them belong to the name of poverty-stricken people. So in terms of employment policies, we will give them some privileged policies. But they're not the only target. So that's the situation. The next question. The lady in the second row. Thank you. I am a reporter from the Xiaokang magazine. At national level, for the poverty alleviation campaign in Hubei province and the poor people living in Hubei, do you have some special policies and support measures? So this is a question about supporting Hubei. Hubei was hit most by coronavirus. General Secretary Xi Jinping paid a visit to Hubei, calling upon Hubei people to unite to conquer this epidemic. He also called upon central government agencies, and particularly Eastern China, to help Hubei out. To resume the social and economic development in Hubei province, the CPC Central Committee and the national government have made a series of policies, and poverty alleviation is one pillar. This year, the central fiscal budget leaned towards Hubei province in poverty alleviation campaign. Second, the State Council Leading Group Office of Poverty Alleviation and Development organized 7 provinces in eastern China to receive more migrant workers from Hubei province, and we call that campaign 7+1. As I said, there is a policy called consumption-based poverty alleviation policy, which is actually to help those people affected to boost their sales. So the labor market cooperation with Hubei province, the sales boosting are some of those policies, just to name a few. For now, in Hubei province alone, for the poor people working elsewhere, the number is over 80% of the total. It's actually approaching 90%. And according to the forecast, by the end of this month, the ratio will rebound to the level last year. Thank you. Next question. No? If that is the case, this is the end of this press conference. Thank you, Director Liu, and thank you for your time.